All right, everyone should see my screen now, I hope. And with this, yeah, thank you for your introduction, Jire, and welcome to our session. We have two parts today that are already mentioned in the title of today's session. The first part, as you can read here, will be focusing on generative AI tools and its influence on the field of design. And the second part will be about designing AI, which Maria will take over. So let's start. And first, I will just quickly introduce myself a little more in detail. As Jiri already mentioned, with my interdisciplinary background in computer science, psychology, and design, I then focused on the field of experience design, user experience design. And I've been working as a designer for many years, teaching at different universities and coaching and conducting workshops for companies with our own agency.
은장, 라무세르.
I guess another one to mute. Yeah, as Yuri also mentioned, in recent years I went more into design research, and here I'm currently working on my PhD thesis, which will also be a topic later in my talk. And as you already mentioned, my book. Yeah, I wrote a textbook for creatives and, as I like to state it, future visionaries on experience design. And this book will also be published in English this year. And so far, a quick intro about myself. Let's start into today's topic. And for this, I would like to ask you to look around and answer the following question. What is designed around you? You can answer in the chat, but I'm very happy if you unmute yourself and just name whatever comes to your mind. Look around in your room. What is designed? We got one answer already. We have a coffee mug. What else? Computer, the window, the blanket, standing desk, pen, street, a lamp. I guess the more you look around, the more maybe the first answer in the chat at least summarizes it very well. We could also question the other way around and ask what is not designed around you. Any idea about that? Do you encounter anything around you that might not be designed? A hole in the ceiling. Well, not intentionally, probably. Water. That's interesting. Nature outside the window. Sunshine is not. The house plants, maybe, but I also like the answer of even my dog is designed as it is a special breeding. We could even apply this to our plants because they are also somewhat manufactured. Ideas are not designed, or maybe are. Well, I guess I just wanted to shift our attention to our surrounding and how much of design is surrounding us. And somewhat the first answers what I will repeat, because there is a famous graphic designer named Chip Kidd. He summarized it quite well. Everything that is not made by nature was designed by someone. And so all these things surrounding us that we see, that we sense, use, and experience were thought about and designed by some people. So we live in a designed world, everything is designed, and people behind this might be from the field of product design, graphic design, layout, illustration, service design, architecture, and thought of the shape and the interaction we do with all these things. And now, with the rise of widely available generative tools of artificial intelligence, especially in industries like design, questions and concerns rose about the impact of this technology, as the power of these tools to generate, for example, any creative image or any text that one can imagine in seconds instead of hours, suddenly shakes the design profession at its core. And people start asking, well, AI can take over design, can it, right? So here I'd like to look at some examples where it actually gets very close to taking over the designer's task. For example, if we are up to developing a brand design and we have to find a suitable name, we can just simply ask any AI chatbot and get endless ideas for names, which is wonderful to explore and brainstorm much faster. Well, instead of brainstorming ourselves, searching for creative sparks within our own minds. We can also use AI chatbots to, for example, iterate about design drafts, to get new input, like in a creative team, and to spark new ideas, what direction we could go for. And this is like a ping pong with a chatbot. But even further, we can create any creative image. And this especially challenges many visual design tasks, for example, in the field of interior design. If you need a new shelf design, you get endless ideas in the form of very realistic renderings instead of starting from a blank page and then iterating on these drafts, which usually takes hours and days, and suddenly it becomes manageable within just some minutes. And also when it comes to image generation and editing, these editing steps that you see here in the video usually take hours for those of you who have worked with Photoshop before. And with these possibilities, suddenly it becomes much faster and and much more accessible, even without profound knowledge in image editing. And today's generative AI tools can already do much more. You can even design an interactive prototype of an app with just a text prompt. Here I was searching for a carpooling app for students, and I just added some styles. And with that, within seconds, I got a prototype generated that serves as a base and also molds ideas into a tangible experience that help to communicate ideas much easier and therefore saves time, of course. And last but not least, and I could have also generated this whole presentation with AI with just one text prompt to generate an introduction into the topic of AI tools in the field of design. And with just this one tiny text prompt, I get a agenda, and also I get to choose the design. And then within seconds, you get a whole base for a presentation, all generated and all editable. So everything is then only focused on the content, but you don't have to focus on the creative design part, like layout, images, and charts anymore, which is taking away the design part to some extent. And so seeing the fast evolution of Gen AI tools, more than ever the question rises, is generative AI only another new tool, like the introduction of computers or the development of design tools like the Adobe tools? Or is it rather changing the field of design at its core? Because the core is based on creativity. So will we soon or already ongoing say, well, hi AI, but by creativity? And this leads me to the main question I'm working on as part of my PhD project at the LMU in Munich in the Department of Psychology, where I'm investigating on the influence of generative AI tools on the creative design process. And in the following part, I will take you onto a short trip into this question and some first impressions from my research. So first, let's define the core of the design profession, creativity. After its standard definition, creativity can be seen as an ability that requires both originality and effectiveness. So it's about generating new work that must simultaneously be novel and useful in its context. So, for example, this hammer prototype is definitely novel, but in its context, not useful, and therefore it does not meet all requirements for a successful completion of a creative task. If we look at creativity on a cognitive level, creative thinking requires the interplay of two modes of thought: divergent thinking, which is about generating a lot of possible solutions to a problem or question. And on the other side, convergent thinking, which is about choosing which idea from all the generated one is most worth pursuing. So far, current research shows that less ideas are being generated when using AI tools in creative design processes. So this opens up the question to what extent the ability of divergent thinking might be replaced by generative AI tools, shifting the designer's focus then only to the convergent part of the creative process. And this, of course, then opens the question, how is the creative experience changing? And lastly, the question is, why are creative tasks usually very enjoyable? And the answer to this is because of the flow experience, which is also somewhat called the driver of creative work. This state of mind is described, among others, as intrinsically rewarding, such that often the end goal is just an excuse for the process. So to achieve this state of mind, the task needs to be balanced between the individual skill set and the task's difficulty. And with the rise of AI tools, the question arises whether the achievement of flow state during a creative task is changing when designing with AI tools. Those are like three main topics I'm focusing on in my research. And to investigate on these questions, I put a focus on the explicitly creative process of designing logos to investigate the impact of generative AI tools, as logo design explicitly requires the idea generation and then the visual design of this idea. And so I'm comparing the creative logo design process without and with AI tools. And just to now focus or get our brains working towards the logo design sphere, I brought a quick logo quiz. And so let's see if you know what brands are hiding behind these designs. any volunteer, maybe from left to right, or you can also just put it in the chat, of course. We have Nike, we have Airbnb, Costa Coffee, Instagram, Pringles, right? So we have Nike, Pringles, then we have Airbnb, then we have Starbucks, not Costa, very true, and then we have Instagram. This just shows that a logo is like the brand's face. And with the face, we remember the brand's name. So the design is crucial here. And when designing a logo, the design process can be roughly defined into the following steps. The starting point is usually a briefing, where we have to understand the name, understand the product, the target group, and the brand's values. And the next step here, well, not the next step, but I brought a briefing that I'm also using in my research, which is about designing a logo for a non-alcoholic craft beer brand. And with this briefing, usually without AI tools, we go in the next step into a research and inspiration phase, sketching, searching for other brands, brainstorming what we want to focus on. And then from here, sketching out first ideas. And from this sketch phase, usually on paper, because it's just way quicker, we jump into a digital fine tune. And then maybe in the last step, we end up with a final draft. And of course, in the real world, this process is iterative. So meaning we circle through these stages until the customer or whoever we are designing for is happy with the final design. When we design with AI tools, you have the easy possibility of just taking the logo briefing and putting it into any text and image generating AI tool. And I did this just to show what is possible with, for example, here, ChatGPT Plus. We take the briefing and we just dump it into the chatbot. And then suddenly, when we look at the design process, all the steps after the briefing, the research and inspiration phase, sketching, the digital fine-tune, and also the final draft, are taken over by the AI tool. And with this, the design process is majorly changed. And we can just generate endless ideas and endless final drafts, even though, of course, they are not final. But when we think of designing without AI, how we start from paper and first try to find sparks in our own mind, this becomes obsolete. And we just skip these steps. So as my research is still ongoing, I'm very excited to find out if there are significant changes in the design experience. But for today, I wanted to share some outcomes from the discussions that I held after my pilot studies, as I always ended the two design processes with a group discussion together with the participants. And these are some interesting quotes I got. For example, one participant compared the design experience as the following: AI felt like using a crutch, even though you're not hurt. It offers support, but I was not moving as usual in the design process. And this relates to when we compare the design process from the steps you usually take. Another quote I got is, when I was using AI, the process was suddenly more about fixing the AI's design mistakes than actually thinking of ideas and designing. Because usually when you get these first drafts, well, there are spelling mistakes, the color is not what you want, and maybe you have the specific image in mind, and suddenly you start to optimize and just tell the chatbot what you actually want to see instead of doing it yourself. And this is when you start fixing the AI's design mistakes, then actually doing the design yourself. And then it's a complete different experience. Another quote I got is, the output from AI helped me a lot for inspiration and to think into different directions. Obviously, this helps as we see many ideas instead of searching in any browser or scrolling through Pinterest or wherever we find our inspiration. This is definitely helpful. And also, another participant mentioned AI makes the start into the design process easier. It fills the starting blank page for you. And I guess this doesn't only apply for image generation, but also for any text generation. The blank page is sometimes filled with fear. And instead of having this blank page, we have the possibility to start with ideas already filled on this blank page. And one more quote that I thought was describing the experience well, or in an interesting aspect of it, is when designing, I usually enter a satisfying emotional state. I experienced this during the design process without AI tools. But when designing with AI, I was not emotionally engaged at all. And this maybe is connected to what I presented before, the flow state. And it's something that even if you are not in logo design, maybe this also applies to other domains. And to see if there are significant differences, I of course need to finish and then analyze the conducted data. But in the discussions, it was very obvious that the feeling of being creative was a different one when using AI tools in the design process. And so coming back to the entering question, this suggests maybe that the creative experience is changing when using AI tools. And it is more than just another new tool, as it takes over, to some extent, the divergent thinking part of the design process, as generative AI tools are able to generate new ideas much faster, within seconds, than we do when we go into brainstorming. So as an outlook, this could be an indicator that generative AI is changing the design profession and its perception as a creative activity. So mainly the perception of the design profession. So maybe it will be interesting to see if the suggestion to pursue a creative profession in the future will still be design. And this is what I want to contribute to with my research, to this ongoing discussion and questioning of the influence of AI tools in design. And with this open questioning outlook, I thank you very much for your attention and for the opportunity to talk here. And we will now dive into the second part of today's session. From me talking about AI in design, Maria will take you into the topic of designing AI. Thank you very much.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Are you able to see my screen?
Not yet.
Not yet.
I do. I see it.
Yes? Okay.
I can see it.
Okay.
Yes, it's just not on full
The presentation mode. Okay. Oh,
Yes.
sorry. Wait 1 second. Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much, Beate, for the introduction. Yeah, so let me hit it off with designing AI. So my name is Maria. I'm a UX designer, and today I will be talking about how can we design AI through an intersectional lens that allows for accessibility and equity as well. So we just heard about how AI is reshaping the way we design and how that is essentially opening new opportunities for innovation, for creativity, and for more personalized experiences, right? I think as designers and practitioners, we can also think it the other way around. So how do we design AI? How do we get like an impact on the database? How do we get an impact on technology through design? I think that's one of the questions that came to my mind as a practitioner. And I always think of designers, and I think Beate also touched a little bit on this, as the intermediaries between humans and technology. And as these intermediaries, I also think about what are some of the frameworks that we're considering to ensure that design and the technical process enables everyone in technology to use design. How do we craft experiences? How do we craft interfaces and systems that leverage AI to create more inclusive experiences and practices? And how and what technology can we use to create more equitable and inclusive features? How can we also provide insights to create technology that is a bit more inclusive? And with this, three topics come into my mind. The first one is accessibility in design. And I think for those that are designers, you might be a little bit familiar with this. We also have intersectionality in design. For which people are we designing, essentially? And then we have the means towards we reach design, which is technology, right? So I think the overarching question that encapsulates kind of like these research questions is, for whom are we designing for? Are we designing for the default user? Are we actually considering everyone when we design? And with this, I would like to introduce myself. I am a UX designer. I design products and services pretty much. I have a very similar background like Beate. I have designed websites to apps to digital installations. I have worked in the financial, healthcare, automotive, beauty, and e-com sectors. And I have the opportunity to work with really great institutions like the Max Planck Institute in the Circadian Rhythm department. I have worked with Accenture Song in London and in Berlin. I have also worked with digital production agencies. And I think the common thread amongst this is that we always think about who are we designing for. And I think when I was working at one point in my career, something came to my mind. And I think I've always been designing for able bodies. But a few months ago, I started working for Patronus. And if you want, you can look it up. Patronus is this startup that essentially designs emergency watches for seniors. And I realized that I have been missing something really important throughout my whole career. I think something that I didn't really think about is for who I was designing. I was just having like in mind this abled person, kind of like the default user. And I really didn't think about people with disabilities or people that weren't, maybe they have like some visual impairments. And I think working with seniors who face unique challenges in mobility and also in health and in terms of accessibility made me question that approach. And with this, for those who are designers, I think you might be familiar with the term accessibility, but for those who aren't designers, accessibility is essentially how you can access design, how you can access technology. And accessibility can also be a standard by which you measure a product. It's kind of like a list in terms of like color, contrast, and it essentially ensures that product, services, and digital interfaces can be used by everyone, regardless of their physical, cognitive, sensory, or situational abilities, and removes all of these barriers, making content operable, understandable, and also robust. So accessibility, the traditional accessibility, focuses on functional needs, on mobility, vision, and hearing impairments. And in Europe, it exists the Europe Accessibility Act, which essentially covers topics that impact more specifically disabled people regarding color, contrast, or text elements in an interface. So if you go to your computer, you can also have this kind of like audio for, if you're like a blind person, you can like hover over any element and it will tell you what are you hovering over. and then it'll make a digital interface accessible for people that have visual impairments, for instance. And something that I noticed is that we might overlook other intersections of identity. So when I was working at Patronus, I didn't only realize that we were designing for seniors, but sometimes these seniors were not only German, there were also yeah, exactly. You know, they weren't only German, they were also, maybe they came from Turkey, maybe they have like a different background. And this not only made them, you know, we needed to think about how can we make this product accessible for different kinds of populations. So it's not only about making a product for disabled, but like, let's situate that disability within a context. And I think as designers, we never really think about that. We always, I think we're also conditioned very much by the demands of the markets. And sometimes the market in the eyes of business people looks sometimes very different. And I thought that, you know, there could be an opportunity here as a design practitioner. So with this, the problem that I saw is that accessibility in design is often quite reduced to technical considerations. As I've mentioned, sometimes we only look at contrast, ratios, legibility, font sizes. And this has a very like narrowing and specific kind of like checkbox sort of perspective. And while these perspectives are very critical, I'm not saying that these are not important, they represent a narrow view of accessibility. And I think this technical approach often ignores the broader social, cultural, and systemic factors that shape how people experience technology. So I think as a designer, I question, how can we create a more inclusive future through design, one that integrates a deeper framework that considers various dimensions of identity? And the opportunity that I foresee in this is, well, AI is shaping design, but it is our role as designers to shape AI through intentional design. So I think there's also kind of like a moral even or ethical responsibility to create proactively a role for designers in shaping how AI is experienced and how it is implemented. Because at the end of the day, we interact with ChatGPT through a UX interface, right? So how can we gather data from people with diverse perspectives, diverse context, and input that into our design? So how can we do this? I think I see one big opportunity. I think that the first one is to redefine accessibility. Accessibility is that aspect of design that allows us to compile different perspectives. So I think in terms of design, that would be like the first aspect. The second one would be using design as a tool to understand and capture human behavior, and then nurture AI databases. And I'll get a little bit more in depth through these two topics. So my hypothesis with all of this is that by incorporating an intersectional feminist framework into the design and development of digital products and AI systems, we will be able to expand accessibility guidelines and address cultural, social, and identity-based barriers, resulting in a more inclusive user experiences and equitable AI-driven outcomes. And I think this could lead to better user experiences that can also help to create more desirable futures for marginalized and undeserved communities. So I think some of you might be familiar with intersectional feminism, but for those who aren't, I'm just going to make a brief introduction. So I think in 1989, Kimberly Crenshaw, an American law professor, she coined the term. And it's basically a prism for seeing the way in which various forms of inequality often operate together and exacerbate each other. So when you're thinking about someone that is using an interface and is disabled, that person is not only disabled. There are multiple aspects of her identity that come into play whenever she uses that specific product. And what I like about intersectionality is that it can be a tool in which we can examine overlapping systems of oppression or privilege, right? And I think there's an opportunity in implementing intersectional practices in design, specifically in co-creation. I think, and I think, Beate, you might also have touched around this. There's this aspect in design where sometimes, designers, we not only create, this mug, but sometimes we're even going a step further and we can create healthcare systems, we can create financial systems. And we do not have the knowledge that lawyers or healthcare practitioners might have, right? But what we do, and I think part of our role as designers, is to become facilitators. And this means that we gather different perspectives and we co-create. We incorporate different perspectives into the design process. We structure and capture their knowledge, and then we say, oh, if lawyers have all of this knowledge and all of these needs, then we can create something. And I think this could also be possible for populations that might be disregarded often in product design or when we're creating products. So for instance, this is a case that I use for WhatsApp. A couple of years ago, we were trying to understand how women in Mexico, particularly in Puebla, which is like, I wouldn't say rural area, but there are some rural parts of that area. I'm also Mexican. So we were trying to understand what were the different variables of indigenous women in this area, right? So we thought about Marisabel. Marisabel, she's 74, she lives in Puebla. There are several aspects of her identity, right? She copes with a disability, she's indigenous, she is female, she lives in a rural location. There is a certain aspect of economic marginalization. She has low digital literacy and she's over 70. So I think the challenge for us was, how can we create a tool that actually allows her to participate in the local economy, right? And how is she being able to turn her context from, she managed a hotel with her sisters. So how can we enable her to access clients, and how can we enable her to create a tool that will allow her to put food on the table, right? So through WhatsApp Business, actually WhatsApp was a tool that she was already using. So it was actually super easy for her to use. How can we allow her to communicate with her clients? How can we allow her to get multi-language support? So for instance, for this woman, Spanish wasn't her first language. She actually spoke an indigenous language, which is Mixtec. And how can we allow her to have offline functionalities, because she's sometimes in a rural community that not always has internet connection or Wi-Fi, right? So we thought about, how can we create an interface that it's super easy to use and that allows her to navigate and bridge that economic disparity that she might have with her husband, for instance. And this also made me think about the lack of intersectional approaches in UX design, and how this creates limiting diversity intervention and biases. So many interventions for women are often ineffective. Sometimes we only look at socioeconomic status. If they can purchase a service, okay, then they're a target, but we don't look at the broader system of things that intersect with us women. We also saw that there was a critical gap in user experience research. So we saw that, we were excluding a number of significant user groups in the design process. As I said, we didn't look at race, we didn't look at, sometimes we didn't look at the disability of the person, or religion, or language, right? And I think there could also be an opportunity to apply intersectional feminism to design. How can we create a syllabus? How can we create a set of criteria into which we can apply this into not only the discovery aspect and understanding users, but into the different phases of the design process? So I was doing a little bit of research to see if this was actually a topic that other people and other designers actually questioned, like myself. And apparently there are designers that think about it and that have incorporated into intersectionality into the design process. And I looked at Sarah Hoffman, and this is more or less how her design process looked like whenever she incorporates accessibility. So she looks at identity, circumstances, behavior, and environment, and this creates a user persona, which is essentially kind of like the North Star when we're designing. You always have to empathize and think about the context of the user. And I also like this kind of like diagram a lot, because it allows you to understand not only oppression, but also privilege. So you're not only looking, for instance, if you're designing for a man, it's not only about privilege, but you need to understand that that person might be old, non-literate, might belong to an LGBTQ community. And there are other aspects of intersectionality that come into play when you're designing for these people. And then this leads me to the third topic, which is AI and user experience design. And I think AI has a unique way of opening possibilities. So one example can be the Neuralink. I'm not a fan of the person that's behind this, but I think the idea that, for instance, I think this was specifically, the Neuralink was connected into one of the nerves at the brain of this person, and then essentially enable that person to access a computer with his mind without being able to touch it, because this person is paralyzed. And I think AI just really disrupts the way that we have been thinking about accessibility, right? Because if this is the future of design, then color and contrast are not so relevant anymore, because the context and the panorama has been completely changed. I think the second thing that we can think about is how we embed intersectionality into AI. So this means accounting for better and more diverse data sets that consider cultural nuances and ethical considerations, ensuring that also AI solutions empower marginalized communities. And as Beate said, how can we leverage existing frameworks of AI, and how can we integrate them into the design practice? So this is more or less how the design process looks. And I think Beate did a much better job at like explaining you in a nutshell how the design process works. But I do think that even though there are various stages of the design process where intersectionality can be embedded, I think the part where it can drive more value is at the discovery stage. Why? Because if we have at the core of our design, so essentially the discovery stage sets the tone for the rest of the project, right? So if we start thinking about people with an intersectional lens, then the defined design and develop phases can also carry on with this mentality, right? And we can also think about, for instance, in the discovery phase, having co-creation workshops with marginalized communities. We can think about creating intersectional research frameworks that have overlapping barriers, and not only one challenge, but how the sum of these challenges make a unique context for this person. And also, we can also have AI tools for data analysis, and we can also create data sets that are nurtured because of this behavior. So in a nutshell, I think this intersectional framework could have the potential to demonstrate that design is not just about representation, right? It's not only about designing for people that have a specific market number, so to say, but it's also about dismantling systems of oppression and technology. And also by embedding equity across every stage, it can shift from a reactive problem solving to a proactive systems change. And in a bit, I'll show you why. I think also design can influence AI by shaping how data sets are curated, systems are trained, and user interactions are crafted to ensure AI solutions are ethical, user-centered, and aligned with real-world needs. And I developed this framework of how we can basically design AI. So one way would be top-down. So we can think about having intersectionality as the foundational principle that proactively guides the development of technology design and that ensures systemic equity and justice. So we think about theory, then we think about, okay, what are the technical frameworks or the technical infrastructure that we need to have? And then we design human behavior, right? So we have these design interventions that are the output of this intersectionality in technology. But we can also think about this the other way around. We can think about collecting data through design, technology, and then how that impacts the practice of intersectionality. I think we can also gather a lot of input from how people are using these new systems, these new technologies are going to be put out there. And I think this creates iteration and a feedback state. And just as Beate said, something that's really characteristic about the practice of design is that it is never finished, So in design, we always have an iteration stage. We're always compiling feedback about the users. And that is, I think, beautiful in itself because it's never perfect. It's always going to have or always going to need something more. And I think with AI and specifically with software developing solutions, it's much easier to incorporate it into the design process and iterate and just become better and better and pivot. So having said all of this, I would like just to like illustrate my point with some examples and potential use cases. So as I said, we can think about systems and we can also think about how products can actually shape systems. And I'll just show you 3 examples of how this could be done. The first example is participatory machine learning. So it's one of the researchers that I've based some of my work on is Catherine D'Ignacio, and she's an MIT professor. She developed detection models in feminicide alert detection in Latin America. The second one that I will show, it's also similar to this one. It's called Eagle Eye. So essentially, it's a platform that helps prevent gender violence in the Dominican Republic. And ultimately, I'll show you Violeta, Sofia, and Sarah, which are chatbots that help women in rural areas in Mexico to identify and mitigate gender-based violence. So here we can see how we can create participatory machine learning methods. So we can see that essentially Catherine D'Ignacio and a group of researchers created this concept of data activism, and they created and labeled data set for identifying femicides, media reports from family members of victims, journalists. And I think that the main problem here was that there wasn't enough data about the victims. So officially, because victims don't officially report whenever there has been a crime. So what they did is just investigate a lot through family members, through journalists, through people that also have a lot of empirical data about the case, and created this data set model that I think has like an 81% of accuracy in documenting feminicides and also reducing a lot of the labor required to identify and log femicides. And you might ask, how is this related to design? Well, at the end of the day, this needs to go through an interface, right? This needs to be designed in terms of like the program that they're using. So this also could also make us think about the things that we could be designing also in the future. The second thing that I want to mention is the co-designing methods. So this enabled them to compile a robust data for activist journalists and also measure the scale of the problem. And at the end of the day, this influences as well policymaking, right? So it's not only about creating a product, but it's also helping us to shape technology and to shape policies at the end of the day. And what I thought it was most interesting about this is that she mentioned 7 data practices that can help us to challenge systemic inequities and prioritize fairness, justice, and inclusion. So the first one was to examine power. So what holds power, challenge power, elevate emotion, make labor visible, acknowledge work, highlight the value of the invisible labor behind data science, rethink binary. So not only think about gender, race, and binary terms, but more in broader classifications and question them a little bit more. Embrace pluralism, so incorporate diversity, multiple perspectives from marginalized groups to create richer and more accurate data, and also consider context. So data is never neutral. It reflects social conditions, and understanding its context leads to ethical interpretation. The second kind of project that I want to show you is Eagle Eye. So Eagle Eye is an initiative of the Dominican Republic. And they essentially created this model that goes through social media and enables to detect social tensions in the digital world and allows to detect femicides or the potential, not only the femicide itself, but also like to prevent it. So they were looking at, for instance, baseball data to see if a team lost, then the rate for a femicide to happen was a bit higher. And this can also impact as well data-driven advocacy, and can also help shape policies in the country. And then the third one that I wanted to show you are the chatbots that mitigate gender violence. So this is an initiative that happens, I think, in Mexico and Peru, and I think also in Chile. And it helps to, of course, detect femicides, but it also helps to, it helps victims of gender-based violence to understand if they are being targeted or if they are being part of a gender violence situation. And by offering educational resources and reducing the barriers to seek help, essentially these chatbots acted as lifelines, particularly in regions where stigma and fear prevent women from reaching out. And these are all just examples of how we can also think about using AI to prevent and to include an intersectional approach. Also because sometimes women in these communities, for instance, in Mexico, a lot of I think 71% of women in Mexico have a smartphone, but they might not have access to a hospital. So, or they might not have access to broader lines of connection to other services that can actually help them to get away from these situations. So with that being said, I think the main takeaway, I'm also concerned because I think we're approaching time. But I would like to leave you with three things. I think we can design inclusive and accessible AI. I think UX shapes impactful solutions for social justice. We're not only designing products. I think the impact that we're having as designers is way, it's just far-reaching. And we can create accessible and user-centered design that makes AI tools more impactful. We can create intersectional design that improves AI inclusivity and equity. And UX design shapes ethical and it also shapes AI's ethical and practical impact. And with that, I think we can go for a round of questions. And so thank you, everyone.